Okay, so we're going to continue with Project 4 on number 5 in Part 1. And I keep forgetting to tell you to save, so I'm going to do Save As, Desktop. I'm putting it on my desktop, you don't have to. Project 4 Example. I'm calling it Example because I've already got Project 4 finished, and I don't want to overwrite it. Okay, so you're going to create a table in the same worksheet that lists the beta, etc. So I'm going to do it like this over here. So I'm going to call it security, or I'll say asset because that way it's a portfolio account, beta, and standard deviation. And I'm also going to put the R squared for each stock and the portfolio. So I'm going to use cell referencing just because there are a couple of things I can make easier this way. It's not really easy because of the way the output is for the regressions. But I can do the asset name. And I want to do that. I'm going to get the beta from here, right there. And then I'm also going to get the R squared from the regression. And you can, by the way, you want the adjusted R squared. That's the one that you want because that's adjusted for the number of variables in the regression. For these it won't be very different because you've only got one variable in the intercept. And I'm going to leave the standard deviation blank for just a minute because I'm going to show you a potentially lazy way to do this. You might not think it's an easier way, so don't do it if you don't like it. But I'm going to drag this down kind of a long way to get all of them, including the portfolio, please. And then I'm going to get rid of all the ones in between that I don't need. So, crazy, right? It may not be easier, like I said, to do this. Shift cells up for each of them. And another shortcut is once I've done something, if I do Control Y, it will do the same thing again on the new thing that I've blocked, that I've selected. And one more, portfolio. Oops. I wonder what happened there. Okay, I think I'm going to just grab that the hard way. Because I want the portfolio, unless it's done different spacing on the portfolio. It has a different number of spaces in between, but that's okay. And that's for the asset name. Beta of the portfolio is down here. Oh, that's what happened. I've got some kind of weird thing going on here with my output. And I'm not going to worry about it. Yours won't look like that. And my R squared for that. Portfolio. That's kind of funny. Okay. I hope that doesn't confuse you. I think it'll be fine. And I'm going to have fewer decimal places. Just don't like that many. Okay, for the standard deviation, I'm going to show you how to do copy, paste, transpose. So let me come over here and copy. I'm going to copy the standard deviation for all of those. And now the problem is going to be that if I just transpose it, it's going to use cell referencing, and it's not going to be able to calculate the standard deviation. So I'm going to paste special, and I'm going to paste values. So I'm going to do it this way. And then I'm going to copy this. So now this contains the value of the cell that had the standard deviation in it, whereas down here it's got the formula. So this has the actual number. It's rounded, but not much. So then I'm going to copy that. I'm going to right click and transpose. See, this one is transpose. Okay. It might be easier for you just to do cell referencing. For me, I take the shortcuts when I can. Okay, and I want to get the portfolio standard deviation, which is down here. And I calculated it. Doggone it, I know I did. There it is. Oops. Portfolio standard deviation is right there. So now I have a sort of summary of all my relevant data, so that I can make a chart of the betas and the standard deviation. I wanted to show you the R squared because when we use the CAPM, we always assume that the beta actually is relevant for the relationship between the stock and the S&P return, but you can see that for some of them the R squared is relatively low. So for love it's fairly low, for Rackspace it's fairly low. So that means the model isn't a good fit, that the beta doesn't explain very much of the variation in the dependent variable, which is the return on the security. That's true for love, and it's true for Rackspace. Notice that the R squared is not the highest, but pretty high for the portfolio, so the goodness of fit will be better for the portfolio by the nature of the fact that it's a portfolio, and so you've averaged out some numbers. So now you're going to create a chart of the betas and the standard deviation. This is a little bit different because the chart has two axes. The one on the right is for beta, and the one on the left is for standard deviation, because their units are quite different. Notice that standard deviation is a positive %, and beta is a number, somewhere usually around 1. So here's how we're going to do that. First, we're going to insert a chart, and it's going to be a 2D column chart like we've been using. And then we're going to select our data. We're going to add beta. Actually, I want the beta on the right, so I'm going to choose standard deviation. And the values of standard deviation are here. I should have rounded those, but I will. And the horizontal axis is going to be the stocks, the names of the stocks, and the portfolio. I'm going to add one more series. It's going to be beta, and these are the values. Notice how funny it looks right now because standard deviations are very small, betas are much bigger, so it looks kind of funny. So I'm going to give this another axis, and I'm going to click on the beta axis, and I'm going to go format data series. Or you can come up here to the format screen and say format current selection. So a couple different ways to get to there. Anyway, I'm going to put that data on a secondary axis, and then I'm going to make the gap wider. So what that does is make by gap it means the gap between the two orange columns. So it makes the columns narrower when you make the gap wider. And it's not seeming to want to do it much wider than that. So I can do that, and then I can do the same thing with this one, except make it smaller, make the gap smaller, which makes the column wider if the gap in between is smaller. Okay, just to make them show up a little bit better. Okay, you can go away so we can see the graph. So now you need to put some nice labels on this graph. I'm going to let you do that. You see what mine looks like, but mine isn't labeled. So you want to say, what's this axis, what's this axis, what's this axis, and give it a chart title. And then I would also suggest giving it a legend, like I've got here, because, whoops, I don't know why it does that. Because this is kind of important. And it's not, well, it's kind of obvious because of the scales, but I think you should put a legend. I like putting mine on the bottom on something like this, but I didn't this time. Okay, so number 7 says run one more regression. So for one of your stocks, estimate the beta of the stock using the returns that you didn't use in step 4. So for example, yours 2009 to 2011. I said 2013 there, but I'm going to save this. But for 2009 through 2011. So I'm going to do one more beta. I'm just going to choose Rackspace because I think there's going to be a big difference between Rackspace's beta before and after some crazy stuff that happened to Rackspace. So I'm going to go data analysis. You should be an expert at this by now because you've done a bunch of them. My Y range is going to be Rackspace, but I'm going to come, so that's in column G. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to start where I left off. So it's not very many observations, but it's okay. And then same for the S&P. You have to choose the same number of months or it won't work. And my output range is going to be, I'm going to put it down here at the bottom. And you don't have to do anything with this yet except you're going to answer a question that's going to talk about that. So I was right. The beta for Rackspace using the old data is 1.07 and using the new data is 1.58. So there's quite a bit of difference in the beta. If you think about it from the finance perspective, that means that now, this is the more current one, Rackspace has more risk than it did in 2009 through 2011. And when I say risk, I mean systematic risk. It doesn't mean that the standard deviation was the same. You can certainly check that. But that the company has more systematic risk than it had in the earlier period. Okay, so I guess I'm going to stop here and continue with section 2, part 2, and you're going to answer some questions in a Word document. So please answer your questions in a Word document so I can find it useful. Thank you.